In this video, we'll learn how to use the Modo renderer right here inside of MARI. Alright, so what you can see here on my canvas is really a fraction of the complete asset for this assassin. And this is something that I do need to go ahead and apologize to you in advance for. This asset, well, it's huge. It's almost 600 megabytes, and it's not shocking to me that it takes quite a while to render, but for the sake of this video, what I've done is I've gone ahead and sort of trimmed down the asset just a little bit here so we can try and get a little quicker response out of the render engine. Now, if you're using the Assassin Final archive, you may end up waiting quite a long time. One thing you can do to sort of mitigate this, what I've done here with this particular version of the asset is I've come into my texture channels and I have gone ahead and pre-flattened them. And I've done that just simply by coming over, right-clicking on each channel and choosing the flatten option. Now, we'll talk more about that here in just a moment, but I want to show you how this feature works because it is very, very cool, and it is something that I feel like is beneficial for texture artists. It allows us to actually see what our textures look like when rendered with a ray trace render engine. So let's go ahead and jump in. We'll just right-click on our toolbars up here, and I'm going to open up the Modo Render palette. Now, we used this in the previous video, and we used it for the purpose of baking out an ambient occlusion. And we used it with if we scroll up just a little bit here, the Bake tab active. Now, the Bake tab and the Render tab look pretty similar in the way they're set up. More on that here in just a moment. I do want to come over here to the Settings tab, though, and point out the fact that I'm using this option for use called Default Modo. So what this means is that by using Default Modo, I'm using MARI, and I'm sending to the Modo render engine. But I don't necessarily need a copy of Modo installed and licensed on my machine to do this. All this happens right here inside of MARI. That's the beautiful thing. Now, there is another option we'll explore in the next video that uses a locally installed instance of Modo. More on that in the next video. So let's go ahead and just jump over here to the Render tab, and you can see it's set up in a very similar fashion to the Bake tab. We have a preview area here, and we have sort of an area that looks pretty similar up here, except it's called Channel Assignment. Now, we do have the option to choose a render preset, but as of right now, there is only two options, Basic and None. So we'll go ahead and stick with Basic. Now, under Channel Assignment, we need to go ahead and link MARI channels to Modo effects. So Modo knows how to render these channels. So we'll just click on the plus sign there and come over here, and the first channel I want to link is the diffuse. So the Modo effect we want for that one is going to be the diffuse color. We'll go ahead and hit OK, and you can see it pops up in this list, MARI channel, Modo effect. I'll come in here and continue linking these up, so let's go ahead and choose the normal channel. That's where my normal maps live. We'll go ahead and choose the normal Modo effect. I'll go ahead and choose the specular channel, and for Modo effect here, I'm going to choose specular amount. And we'll go ahead and choose the roughness, and the Modo effect there is going to be called rough. And lastly, I want to go ahead and connect a displacement map. Now, if you have a displacement map you've been working on, it can be connected, and we can connect it with the displace effect right there. All right, great. So we've got all of our channels connected to Modo effects. Now we're ready to go ahead and sort of target an area to render here. Now, with this character here, seeing as how we're going to preview the render in this really tiny little box right here, really it wouldn't suit us to go ahead and render out the entire character. It's not going to give us a really good representation of how our maps are rendering. Really, the purpose of this inside of MARI is so you can really kind of isolate a specific area, render that out, and see if the maps you're working on in that area are working the way they should be. So, to illustrate this, I'm going to go ahead and zoom in kind of on this little leathery armor piece right here on the shoulder. And I am using the IBL that we've used in previous videos. It is set up as an environment light. So now I'm going to go ahead at this point and come down here by this big preview button. I'm not going to click that yet, but let's talk about this flattened option here. So this flattened option, what MARI is going to do is it's going to allow Modo to flatten all of our texture information inside these channels. Now you may be asking yourself, why would I want to do that when I've pre-flattened it? And I made a point to let you know and show you that I've pre-flattened this. Well, again, this is a very high resolution asset. So let's talk about kind of some instances where we might want to use flattened versus the other option, which is not flattened. So this asset has a number of different UDIM numbers, or patches as MARI calls them. But what you need to know is that for projects like this one, flattening a lot of high resolution texture detail across multiple patches could take more time than just rendering out a preview of the textures unflattened. So when it comes to your projects and how you utilize this feature, if you have a simple project with a fairly low resolution textures and a small number of UDIMs, you can almost always use this flattened option. But when you're getting into more complex projects that have high resolution textures across multiple patches, you may want to consider using this not flattened option. Now again, for the purpose of this video, I've pre-flattened all my textures. I've actually stripped out more than half of the geometry out of this asset, and I'm going to use this flattened option just to try and get a very quick level of feedback here from the Modo render engine. So let's go ahead and preview this. I'll go ahead and click on the preview button here. You'll see here that the process begins. Now again, Modo is trying to flatten my textures. So this process in this particular situation should be relatively quick because I've already flattened those. So I'm going to go ahead, while the Modo engine works, I'm going to pause the video and I'll come back as soon as we've finished this rendering of our preview. All right, great. So as you can see, the flattening process here is almost complete. We're at 99%. So as soon as this process completes, what we should see here is inside of this little preview pane, we should begin to see, well, eventually, a preview start to render out here. Now, I've noticed with this asset, it does take a little bit of time, but there we go. You can see it is starting to render out. So we're able to get a nice ray traced rendered preview of what our textures are looking like. And let's say for the example here, this shoulder pad, what I'm wanting to really kind of check is my roughness map. I want to make sure that my roughness and my specular maps are working as I would hope they would be. And you can see here, if I were to zoom in a little bit further on this inside of MARI's canvas, my preview is actually going to update. So there is a link that has been established between my MARI canvas and this preview. So you can see here, now I'm zoomed into a level with this preview area that I can actually start to see that roughness map and the influence that it's having on my render. Now, this is something we can pause, this linkage between our canvas and the preview. All we need to do is come over and simply click on this pause button, and then once we start moving around here, you'll see that we're not going to be updating. So maybe we want to sort of orbit around, zoom in, and maybe look at this from a little different angle here. Maybe something like that. We could then come in and unpause, and eventually this preview will catch up to us here. So now I'm not going to wait for that to happen. I'm just going to, in the meantime, I'll go ahead and pause that because I do want to move on to the lower portion of this dialog. One of the other things we have the ability to do here is actually render out a still image inside of the Modo render palette. So you can do that here by using the render dimensions. Again, these are the default settings here, 360 by 240. And again, we have our flattened option. So this is, again, the exact same as here, except here we're writing out a file to disk. So we can choose to save out a LXO file, which is a native Modo file. And we can also choose to save the render to a specific location. So let me just jump over here to my project files. And I believe I have in my images folder a renders folder here. There we go. We'll just call this something like demo render, something like that. I'll go ahead and save that. And now at this point, all we need to do is simply hit the render button. So I'll go ahead and hit that. And again, we're going to be in the same position as we were a moment ago. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the video while this renders out. And I'll come back and show you what that image looks like. All right, and our render has completed. You can see the preview has come back up here. So I'll just jump over here to an Explorer window, and there you can see my demo render.png. And if I just double click on that here, you can see exactly what our rendered result looks like. So again, this is a new feature inside of MARI 3, and I think it's a fantastic feature, and I'm really excited to be able to render out my textures just so I have an idea of what these textures look like once rendered, right here without ever leaving MARI. All right, great. Let's continue this conversation about rendering with MARI in the next video.